Modern digital identity doesn't run on individual products or vendors. It runs on shared rules that everyone agrees to follow. Public key infrastructure, PKI, is one of the clearest examples of this. At the technical level, standards bodies define how certificates, protocols, and cryptographic algorithms must behave, so different systems can trust each other by default. On top of that, policy groups define what good enough security looks like for certificate authorities, which practices are mandatory, which are forbidden, and how quickly problems must be fixed. Finally, independent audits verify that these rules are actually followed in the real world, not just written in documents. Together, these layers create an ecosystem where a browser in one country can safely trust a website or service in another. Public PKI is tightly constrained by these global standards, while private enterprise PKI can adopt them more flexibly. But both depend on this same engineering of trust through common enforceable standards. When people talk about trust in PKI, they often think only about encryption and certificates. In reality, digital trust rests on three equally important pillars: technology, policy, and audit. The technical pillar is the code and standards, how keys are generated, how certificates are formatted, and how protocols like TLS behave. If this layer is flawed, the whole system can be broken by design. Policy defines the rules for how a certificate authority must operate. Who is allowed to get a certificate, what identity checks are required, how keys must be protected, and how incidents are handled. This is what turns raw cryptography into an agreed trust contract. Audit is the proof that those rules are actually being followed. Independent auditors review evidence, test controls, and certify that a CA is behaving as promised. Browsers and operating systems only include a CA in their trust stores when all three pillars align. That triad is what turns abstract cryptography into something businesses and users can safely rely on. When we talk about digital certificates, almost everything you'll see in the real world is based on one standard, X.509. You can think of X.509 as the DNA of certificates. It defines exactly how identity, a public key, and all the extra rules and constraints are packaged into a single, verifiable object. Because everyone follows this standard, a browser from one vendor, a VPN appliance from another, and an IoT platform from a third can all understand and trust the same certificate. This common language is what makes PKI scalable. The same X.509 format is reused for securing web traffic with TLS, signing software, encrypting email, and giving devices their identities. Later, when we look at certificate fields, key usage, and extensions, we're really just unpacking what X.509 has standardized, so that trust can be automated across all these different systems. When you look at a certificate, think of it as a signed passport for a key pair. At the core, it contains who the certificate is for, who issued it, when it is valid, and the public key that will be used in protocols like TLS. The issuer's digital signature over all of this is what makes the information trustworthy. Around those core fields, extensions add the real logic and guardrails. Basic constraints say whether this certificate is allowed to act as a CA or only as an end entity. If that flag is wrong, a server certificate could accidentally be trusted to issue other certificates, which is a serious risk. Key usage and extended key usage define what the key is allowed to do. For example, create digital signatures, encrypt session keys, or sign code. These uses should be as narrow as possible, so a compromised key can't be abused in other contexts. Subject alternative name tells you which identities this certificate actually represents, such as DNS names or IP addresses. Modern clients rely on SAN, not just the common name, when deciding if a certificate matches the service they're talking to. Together, these fields and extensions let PKI express not just who are you, but also what are you allowed to do, and for how long. That is the foundation of enforceable trust on modern networks. X.509 as a standard is extremely flexible. You can stuff a lot of different fields and extensions into a certificate, and different ecosystems could all do it differently. That would be a nightmare for interoperability. RFC 5280 is the internet's way of narrowing this down so everything can work together. It acts like a filter over generic X.509. It tells CAs which extensions are mandatory for internet use, especially key usage and subject alternative names. It also defines how validation must be done, how to build a trust path, what name constraints mean, and which checks are required or forbidden. When browsers, operating systems, and CAs all follow RFC 5280, a certificate issued in one place can be reliably understood and validated everywhere else. This constrained internet profile is what makes global TLS and PKI actually interoperable at scale. RFC 5280 is the rulebook that keeps certificates on the modern internet interoperable and safe. Think of the mandatory side as hygiene you should always enforce in your PKI. Use subject alternative name for every identity. Browsers and many libraries ignore the old common name, so relying on CN alone is asking for validation bugs. Make revocation real, not theoretical. That means properly publishing CRLs or OCSP responses in the formats and locations clients expect, so compromised certificates can actually be checked and rejected. Constrain what your certificates are allowed to name, and how far a chain can extend. Name constraints and path length limits prevent a single intermediate CA from being used to issue anything for anyone across your environment. And design for crypto agility. Choose strong current algorithms and be ready to migrate away from them as standards evolve. On the legacy side, avoid patterns that lock you into the past. CNE-only identities, SHA-1 or other weak hashes, open-ended validity periods, and small key sizes below 2048 bits. These aren't just old, they create real exploitable risk, and will increasingly fail in modern clients. To understand modern web PKI, you need to know who actually sets the rules. That role is largely played by the CA Browser Forum. You can think of it as a roundtable where the major browsers, operating systems, and public certificate authorities sit together and negotiate what good enough security means for everyone using the internet. They argue about things like how CAs must validate domain ownership, how long certificates can live, what key sizes are acceptable, and how quickly compromised certificates must be revoked. The result of that negotiation is a set of baseline requirements and extended validation guidelines. No law forces vendors to follow them, but in practice, they're mandatory. If a CA doesn't comply, browsers can distrust it, and overnight, every certificate it has ever issued can start throwing security warnings. So this forum is a powerful policy engine behind PKI. It balances security and usability, and it translates abstract cryptographic best practices into concrete enforceable rules for the public internet. Public trust in certificates doesn't come from technology alone. It comes from rules that every public certificate authority must follow. These are called the baseline requirements, and you can think of them as the minimum entry ticket to be trusted by browsers and operating systems. They focus on 4 big areas. First, identity validation. Before a certificate is issued, the CA has to prove the requester really controls that domain or organization using approved methods. Second, operational security. The CA must protect its private keys, monitor its systems, and respond quickly to incidents or misissuance. Third, content profiles. Certificates themselves must follow strict formats, using approved algorithms and extensions, so that every relying party can parse and validate them consistently. And finally, consequence. If a CA cuts corners, there are defined sanctions, up to and including being removed from trust stores, which is effectively a death sentence for that CA's business. Together, these requirements create a baseline level of predictable behavior, so that when your browser trusts a public certificate, it's not blind faith. It's backed by an enforceable global rulebook. PKI policy doesn't live on paper. It creates real ripple effects across the entire web. When the CA browser forum agrees on a new rule, that rule is enforced through browser updates. Browsers become the de facto regulators, because every site owner depends on them for users to connect without scary warnings. Those policy changes drive concrete technical shifts. Shorter certificate lifetimes like the 398-day limit, removal of weak algorithms such as X.509, and the banning of insecure patterns like internal host names. From there, the impact reaches operations and users. Enterprises must adjust their certificate life cycles and automation, or they start seeing outages. End users see changes too. Different padlock behaviors, new error messages, and stricter warnings when something looks untrusted. So when you think about PKI governance, think ecosystem. A single forum decision can force global change in how keys, certificates, and even web applications are managed. So far, we've talked about how browsers and operating systems rely on CAs to vouch for identities. Web trust adds a critical extra layer, an independent auditor verifying that a CA actually follows the rules it claims to follow. You can think of web trust as a financial-style audit, but for PKI operations. CPA organizations review the CA's policies, security controls, key management, and certificate issuance practices. If the CA passes, it receives a formal attestation report. Those reports are not just paperwork. Root programs from browsers and OS vendors require them for inclusion and ongoing trust. If a CA loses its web trust status, its entire certificate ecosystem is at risk. Different flavors of web trust focus on different risks. One looks at general CA operations, another checks compliance with TLS baseline requirements, and another covers extended validation processes. Together, they give relying parties confidence that the CA is both technically and operationally trustworthy, not just cryptographically sound. When a PKI is audited, the goal isn't just to see if certificates work. Auditors look at whether the entire system is trustworthy across 5 dimensions. Security asks, are logical and physical controls strong enough to protect keys, systems, and admin access? Availability looks at whether the PKI can stay up and issue or revoke certificates reliably, even during failures or attacks. Processing integrity is about accuracy. Do requests get validated correctly? Are certificates issued according to policy? And are revocations handled without errors? Confidentiality focuses on whether sensitive data, like private keys, subscriber details, and logs, is properly protected at rest and in transit. Privacy zooms in on how personal information is collected, used, stored, and deleted in line with regulations and stated policies. The audit scope typically covers key protection, issuance, revocation, and logging, and checks all of this against your CP, CPS, and baseline requirements. Together, these criteria tell you whether your PKI is not only secure, but also reliable, compliant, and worthy of being a root of trust for the rest of your infrastructure. In the public web PKI, trust isn't automatic. It's earned and continuously checked. Certificate authorities have to prove, through independent security audits, that they follow strict policies and technical controls. Those audit reports are the passport that lets them even apply to the major root programs run by operating system and browser vendors. If a CA meets the requirements, its root certificates get included in those programs, and from there they flow into the global trust stores on billions of devices. At that point, any certificate the CA issues can be trusted instantly by users and applications worldwide. But this cuts both ways. If a CA fails an audit, hides incidents, or simply stops maintaining the required reports, those same gatekeepers can remove its roots. Distrust is immediate, and every certificate from that CA can break overnight. This gatekeeper process is what keeps the global PKI ecosystem honest. When you design a private PKI, you don't want to reinvent the internet. You take the global standards that public CAs must follow, mirror their best practices, and then adapt them to your own environment. Public CAs live under strict mandates, tight compliance rules, fixed certificate lifetimes, and inclusion in browser and OS root stores. You may not need all that formality internally, but you absolutely want the security lessons that drove those rules. So in a private PKI, you focus on interoperability by aligning with standards like RFC 5288, so your certificates work cleanly with off-the-shelf products and cloud services. You formalize how you operate through internal CP and CPS documents, even if they're lighter weight than public CA versions. And you choose validity periods that match your risk appetite and operations, while still respecting modern expectations for shorter-lived certs. Think of it as an adaptation mirror. Copy what the public ecosystem has proven to be safe and sustainable, then tune it for your own scale, business needs, and risk profile. By now, you've seen a lot of moving parts, so let's connect them into one mental model of digital trust. First, structure. X.509 and RFC 5280 tell everyone exactly how certificates must look and behave. That common format is what lets different browsers, servers, and devices even talk to each other about trust. On top of that, we add rules. The KIA browser forum baseline requirements define how certificate authorities should operate, how they verify identities and domains, how long certificates can live, and how revocation must work. These rules turn cryptography into predictable, governed behavior. Then we need proof. Independent web trust audits check that a CA is actually following those rules in practice, not just on paper. That external verification is what convinces operating systems and browsers to include a CA in their trust stores. When you combine structure, rules, and proof, you get the result. A PKI ecosystem where different organizations can issue and rely on certificates with confidence, and where digital trust is both secure and interoperable at global scale.